Thank you. Shall we start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll just briefly go through a horizontal vertical tail design. So this will also be there for your midterm exam. And if you have finished fuselage design, you can directly jump to this. You don't have to wait for other things. That's the reason why I'm finishing it today. Uh, it consists basically of 5 modules.
The screen is not shared, sir.
Yeah, I'll chat. Okay. Actually, forgot. Thanks. So it consists of 5 modules. The first module is, tail arrangement. You have to choose what type of tail you want, whether H tail, V tail, T tail, conventional tail, or canard, or any other configuration. So then, if you choose that, you can choose it from reference aircraft or according to your special needs or something. If you think of something, you can even differ from your in reference aircraft, no problem. Then we go to horizontal and vertical tail sizing. Tail sizing means what should be the tail area. Okay. And at what length should it be from the uh, aerodynamic center. You have mean aerodynamic chord earlier taken. The quarter chord of that should be the approximate aerodynamic center of the whole airplane. So how far is it? Is the tail aerodynamic center from that location. You have learnt of parameter called LHT and VHT, sorry, LHT, then LVT in flight mechanics, correct? You remember that, Anantakrishnan? Anantakrishnan? Bhuvandev, you remember? Hello, Bhuvandev? Deadly silence, okay. So, after you do that, you just like wing area, you get the area of the tail. Then you proceed just like wing design to get the tail plan form shape. Like how should what is the shape of the airfoil for the vertical tail, horizontal tails. Okay, and that's all. Then you have to look at the tail placement. In the sense, you have to go back again, and then at this time you would have chosen this LHT and VHT from historical values. The relative position of these two you have to vary a little bit so that they don't interfere with each other. It will actually affect something called spin control. Like if the aircraft enters into a spin, you will be able to recover from that. Spin is something like the aircraft is spinning around its own axis and spiraling downwards. You uncontrolled, it may just lead to a crash. If you have to get out of it, you should use a rudder. So when it spins, unfortunately, a portion of the rudder will be in the wake of the horizontal tail when it spins. So you have to make sure that it doesn't lie in the wake in case of such a contingency. So that is tail placement. And after that, the design is over. Okay, so this design is not very difficult. If you know wing design, you repeat it for horizontal tail and vertical tail. Only thing is how to find the area and the distance. And then there's one more thing called, the spin control. There's something called stall control, which we'll come to initially. I suggest you go through all this first section. It contains a lot of interesting, what to say, information about each type of tail, which will aid you in choosing the type of tail for your aircraft. You should know all the tail types and its advantage and disadvantage, because I'll be asking you the Viva, not only because of that, because you are going to be aeronautical engineer in a matter of less than 1 year. So you can get pictures of various types of tails: conventional tail, triple tail, T tail, inverted Y tail, cruciform tail, twin tail, boom tail, H tail. Okay. So tail placement depends on number of factors inducing. There is weight, stability and control, spin recovery, survivability, and combat stealth. Stealth means that the radar cross section should be very less. What do you do for that? Okay. So we'll use empirical relations because we don't have a better guide in choosing some values. So these are based on coefficients that correlate the tail surface area and the locations of the fuselage with the wing area, chord and span of historic aircraft. Historically, they have some data. Based on that, they have chosen this. So when new aircrafts emerge, obviously the historical data will change a little bit. So whatever we are using is probably 25, 30 years old. Someone should make some more attempt to get hold of the new data and see whether this is refined. Okay, that will be a good project to work on, but not now. So this just says that the selection of the tail design is very much like wing design. Okay, and we will not be designing elevators, rudders, and ailerons at this point of time. We will do it later during static stability and control, chapter 11, which is your 10th exercise. 10th or 11th exercise, let's see. Now, just like the wing, you will be estimating the 3D lift characteristics, 3D CL alpha curve and CL by CD curve, and estimating the total drag on the horizontal tail and vertical tail. So tail drag you should, then finally what will you add? You will have wing drag, you will have fuselage drag, you will have horizontal tail drag, you will have vertical tail drag. You should add all of these things and get the minimum drag. So this tail arrangements, which means first of all you should choose what type of tail you are using. Get it from your comparison aircraft, or if you have any other considerations, you can explain why. Conventional tail, it gives the advantages, provides sufficient stability and control, and is at the lowest tail weight. Okay. T-tail, you want the horizontal, usually the horizontal tail, it is affected by the wing location. So if wing is, the wake from the wing will affect the tail basically. Wing wake will affect the tail. So the tail should be placed out of the wing wake for maximum efficiency. So the horizontal tail, if it is lifted above, then most of the time the wing wake will not be affecting the horizontal tail. As a result, you can have a smaller tail wing, horizontal tail area. That is the advantage of T-tail. But because the horizontal tail sits on the top of vertical tail, the vertical tail structure should be heavy enough or strong enough to support the horizontal tail. That is the disadvantage of that. Then cruciform tail is actually advantage and disadvantage are midway between conventional tail and T-tail. Okay. And in T-tail, the horizontal tail is at the end of the vertical tail. So it acts like a winglet. So what happens? Usually at the end of any wing, you'll have trailing edge vortex. If you have a winglet, the effect of this trailing edge or vortex is greatly reduced. So wing drag is reduced. So this horizontal tail will act like a winglet for the vertical tail in a T-tail. That advantage is lost partially in a cruciform tail. Then H tail again, it is just you can reason out the same way. The horizontal tail will be heavy, but vertical tail area will be less. And the vertical tail will not be in the wake of. Now vertical tail's performance affected by the fuselage and wing combination. The wake from wing, it's called side wash. It may affect the vertical tail. That effect will be less if you have a H tail. You have two vertical tails there. So the horizontal tail will be heavier here, and horizontal tail's drag will also be less because of the winglet effect at the ends of the tail. So V tail is usually used for stealth aircrafts, and main disadvantage is you have to control through rudder waiters. Okay, so this is difficult to control. There is something called adverse yaw roll, which means you want to roll in certain yaw in certain directions, you roll in certain direction, but then you turn to the right and the plane rolls to the left, you get something is opposing your maneuver. As a result, you may have to use the rudder also to give extra rolling moment. Okay, so or you may have to further deflect the ailerons. If you don't want this, then you should have a V-tail, an inverted V-tail, okay, which will have, in terms of adverse yaw roll, it will actually, be more favorable, whatever it is. Then you'll have Y-tail. So vertical tail surface is also separate. So you'll have a rudder in the case of Y-tail. You don't have a rudder waiter. Then you'll have twin tails. Twin tails are usually used on highly maneuverable combat aircrafts. Then canard wheel also, of course. The tail is in front of the wing. That is, you are talking only of horizontal tail here. So the canard can have two configurations: control canard and lifting canard. If the tail produces a very little lift and it is a large distance away from AC, it will basically provide moment to counter the wing moment, so that it is called as control canard, mainly used for control. You can also have a lifting canard, okay, which means the tail surface area will be large. It will can give you around 15-20% of the total lift. So this lift actually, will complement your wing's lift. The lift on the wing can be less. As a result, wing area can be less and wing drag will be less. So you can reduce the total drag because the tail is not in the wake of the wing, and the wake of the tail will not affect the wing too much because tail is a small surface area. So I'm just running through this. If you have doubts, you can actually, call me anytime or WhatsApp me. So the lifting canard is designed to stall at a lower angle of attack than the main wing. So if the canard stalls, the wing, you should immediately, reduce the angle of attack so the wing will not stall. So the nose of the aircraft will drop once the canard stall. So the wing stall will be, averted. So it will be automatically, statically stable. Then we go to vertical tail sizing. You can get this expression from your, flight mechanics textbook. S for vertical tail. VT means vertical tail is CVT into BWSW by LVT. CVT is a constant here. Now the BW is the span of the wing. SW is span of the wing. Sorry, SW is area of wing. LVT, as we know, is the distance between the aerodynamic center of wing and vertical tail. How to choose the CVT and LVT is what we are going to do first. This is basically from empirical relationship. Okay. Now go through this carefully. The area of vertical stabilizer here includes only the portion that is exposed above the fuselage, not the portion which is embedded inside the fuselage. Okay, that is one thing you should be careful. It is given here LVT, SVT is the area. Okay. Similarly, for horizontal tail, you will have CHT. Okay, just for the vertical tail, you have similarly you have for the horizontal tail. So canard is different. We'll go look at it later. So for other things, you have the the coefficients, the empirical coefficients here for various types of airplanes. Choose your type of airplanes and choose CVT and CHT. Okay, from this. This is usually given for conventional tail configuration. For H tail, V tail, T tail, etc., you may have to modify these a little bit. So area of the stabilizer given by this CST and LST. You get this CST. LST is also given in a formula here. So okay, this is control. Okay, CC is given here for various Mach numbers. You can take something which is reasonable for your aircraft if you are using canard configuration. Then usually the LHT by fuselage length is taken from comparison aircraft. That's how you determine LHT and LVT. From comparison aircraft, you take the ratio that LVT by the fuselage length. What is that ratio? Take it from some comparison aircraft, or average of all your aircraft will give an idea of this LVT. Now using these and the wingspan, you will know, you can get the vertical tail area. Instead of wingspan, if you use wing chord, you will get horizontal tail area with CHT and LHT. So you have to go through this to understand it in a better fashion. Similarly, for the canard area can be found with CC. Value of CC is given for control canards. For lifting canards, you can have, if you have comparison aircraft, you can take it from there. So for lifting canard, the area is primarily based on the percentage of total lift that the canard designed to produce. Mostly it is 15 to 25%. So in contrast to the aft horizontal tail stabilizer, the canard area includes only exposed portion outside of fuselage, whereas for the horizontal stabilizer, you also include the portion which is inside the fuselage. Okay, so this canard is actually similar to vertical stabilizer in that respect. You consider the area only which is out of the fuselage. Only for horizontal tail, you have to consider the area which goes through the fuselage also. That is also included. Now you get that CHT and CVT for normal, normal aircraft. But for different types of tails, you have to scale them. For T tail, the horizontal tail coefficients can be reduced by 5%. For H tail, the vertical tail coefficient can be, both tail coefficients can be reduced by 5% for a convention compared to a conventional for T tail. For H tail, you can reduce the horizontal tail by 5%. So the vertical area on each side of the wing will be 1/2 of required total area. The V tail, the area of, you have to determine what is the angle between in the V. So you have calculated vertical tail area and horizontal tail area with the same area. The total area of tail will be the sum of this vertical tail and horizontal tail, the angle V between the V will be given by this formula. Okay, that is how you should determine the V tail if you are designing it. See, canard area is given here, LC. But a vertical tail is still behind, only a horizontal tail is front of the wing. So equivalent CVT, it tells you should multiply this factor with the CVT and CST you are getting for T tail, H tail and V tail. Okay. Yeah. If you don't take it from the comparison aircraft, typical lengths for LVT, LHT and LC are given here for various types of engine mounting. So the way type of engine mounting affects the value of the tail by fuselage length. Okay. You can also look at a comparison aircraft, see whether they fall within this range. Okay, then choose whatever you feel is correct. Then tail planform shape, airfoil section, etc. similar to wing. Only thing you are given a range of aspect ratio and taper ratios of the tail based on historic aircraft in this table. Make use of these for horizontal and vertical tails. So in general, we would like to maximize DCL by D alpha. This will maximize the effect of deflecting the control surfaces. Now DCL by D alpha increases with increasing aspect ratio and decreases with increased leading edge sweep angle. So you have to there's more information given here regarding how you should choose the thickness of the tail. The thickness of the tail should be smaller than the thickness of the wing, and the sweep of the tail should be larger than the sweep of the wing. The reason why is given here. I will ask you in the Viva. So you go through that and I'll learn from you. Then when you do that, what should you do? The form factor is given here for some of the things. So please go through this carefully before dealing with the tail design. It's similar to wing design, only the differences are given here. Okay. Now for tail placement, as I told you already, you'll have stall control and spin control. When you say stall control, you want the stall characteristics are affected with location of horizontal stabilizer with respect to the main wing. Now the horizontal stabilizer is in the wake of the main wing at the stall angle of attack. Elevator control will be lost. If you deflect the elevator, it won't have the desired effect. Maybe reduced effect or zero effect will be there. So to prevent this, the horizontal stabilizer is located near the mean chord line of main wing. Okay, that is, or above the wake of the main wing at the stall angle of attack. So this will give you a representative picture of what's happening. See, this small thing is horizontal tail. You see here, this is the wing. At an angle of attack, the wing will be, the wake of the wing is denoted by the gray area, right? Now this HHT is the vertical height of horizontal tail from the mean chord line of the wing. Okay, assume it to be a fuselage center line, or in the mean chord of the wing, you draw a straight line parallel to the fuselage passing through the aerodynamic center of the wing. Now this height HHT, similar line drawn from the this one, the horizontal tail, parallel to fuselage center line. How high should the horizontal tail be placed? That is the question. Okay. So the wake region should not affect this much during most of the flight. So This graph will give you where to place it. On x-axis, you have LHT, horizontal tail, the distance of horizontal tail, this one, divided by mean aerodynamic chord of wing. On y-axis, you will have HHT, which is given from this figure, divided by mean aerodynamic chord of the wing. So the distance is measured from wing quarter chord in terms of LHT by aerodynamic chord. Okay. Now you should avoid this region, which is avoid tail sets blanketed. Okay. Now if okay for subsonic only, don't use it for supersonic flow to place your horizontal tail. You can place it here, best location for tail, or above this line. Okay only if wing alone is okay. What is telling is you better avoid this one, and subsonic only, avoid for supersonic flow also. Okay. So you look at your where are you placing your tail, and then based on the LHT and mean aerodynamic chord, and based on this graph, you determine the best vertical location of the wing, the horizontal tail. Now that location can also determine whether you have a T-tail or a conventional tail, etc. One more thing is, whenever you design a tail, after the whole design is over, during takeoff, you should make sure that the tail does not hit the ground. Takeoff and landing. It's a very dangerous thing. So
Sir,
there is
I have
one. Yeah. Who's it?
Sanjay, sir. Sir, why
Yes.
do tail sections use symmetric airfoil?
Well, what will happen if they see if you deflect the elevator up or down, you want symmetric results.
Yes.
If you reflect the rudder left or right, you want symmetric, you want similar effects. Okay.
Yes.
You don't want to the right, you should, you should deflect more, to the left, you deflect less. That will happen if you use asymmetric airfoil.
Okay.
Okay. Is it clear now?
Yes, sir. Or is it that because at zero angle of attack, asymmetric airfoils may produce some lift, so it is not decided?
Yeah. That is one more thing. Yeah, zero angle of attack. It is a subset of what I told you. At zero angle of attack, what will happen? There will be a side force or upward force which you
Yes.
don't want, downward.
Yes.
That is one more point. Then again, it's not symmetric. It's a subset of what I told you. When you deflect, at zero deflection itself, there will be an effect of deflection.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, that is also correct.
Okay.
So, if you want a higher position, you can go for a cruciform or T-tail. For a T-tail, the trailing edge, all but the trailing edge of the elevator needs to be outside of the wake of the main wing. Having the elevator just inside the wake produce an unsteady buffeting on the pitch control that signals the pilot of an imminent stall. So, if you slightly have the trailing edge inside the wake for a T-tail, if the stall is approaching, pilot will get a warning, so he can immediately correct himself. Okay, so that is you can. This is a very minute point. Then finally, you'll have something called spin control. So when you spin, you can imagine. Okay, the aircraft is rolling. So the relative when horizontal tail is rolling in one direction, the wind will be flowing in the other direction. Now obviously horizontal tail will block the wind, so there is a wake. If the vertical tail is in this wake, or the rudder is in this wake, it is difficult to get out of the spin. Rudder is very essential to get out of the spin. Okay. So you should make sure the rudder is away from the spin. So this figure 610, will tell you how to place your rudder or shift this vertical tail in such a way that the rudder is out of the horizontal tail's wake. So of the horizontal tail, you have some, the distance here. You take 60 degrees from the leading edge, then 30 degrees from trailing edge. That will be the extent of the wake. Okay. In the first figure, the whole of the rudder and horizontal tail is in the wake. This is very dangerous. But either you move the horizontal tail forward so that, see, now this wake doesn't affect most of the rudder, or you can move the vertical tail backward. Here it shows the relative position. You move the horizontal tail backward or vertical tail forward. This way also you get a more effective area of the rudder. What should be this effective area? So at least approximately 30% of the rudder should be outside of the wake. 30% of the rudder should be outside of the wake for good spin recovery. So when you vary this, LHT will vary, LVT will vary. You may have to go back and calculate the tail area again. So you see, there is a complication. It's a slightly iterative approach. Okay. So it's not very complicated, but you have to go through an iterative approach to satisfy all these conditions for tail design. So if you can automate the wing design and this together, yes, why not? Write a code and have it for yourself, no problem.
Sir, I have a question, sir.
Yes.
Sir, are there any other methods to recover from spin, sir?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure actually. I have to dig deeper.
Okay.
You can ask actually your flight dynamics instructor. Who's that, JC or Sushil sir?
Sushil.
Ask Sushil sir. He's the right person to answer the question. Okay, yeah.
Okay, sir.
All right. Now, see, again, suddenly I have to be in interview at 9:30. So what I suggest is, usually I'll end the meeting. I won't end this meeting. Now is group 13 prepared for the presentation on PG rules? Franklin Glovert rule 1 and 2?
Yes, sir. PG rule. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
Then
sir.
rule 1 and rule 2 both, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Raghu is ready with the Gothard rule?
Sir, actually, I messaged you, sir. I didn't get enough material and I didn't understand it properly. So,
Okay, so understand we'll have it on Monday morning.
sir,
Not an
it
issue.
will be better if you give information about it.
I'm asking you because I don't know, no?
Oh, okay.
Okay, I only know how to find fault. That is my specialty. Okay. Sometimes in design, you have to discover things yourself. Then it is good for you. First, let you go through this. I can give you some hints. Okay?
Yes,
Raghu.
yes, sir.
If you have doubts, you can also ask me. You can work together. You can call me,
Okay.
today evening or Sunday. That's not an issue. If you don't ask me, I assume you know everything. Anyway, today morning I didn't see my phone. Did you call me? I got a missed call.
Yes, sir, I called you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll call you back. We can discuss. Not an issue.
Okay.
So on Monday we can discuss. Okay? We can
Okay, sir.
actually have a small presentation and class will be over.
Okay.
Once you give your presentation, class is over on Monday.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now the other group can take over. You listen to them for PG rules. Okay? I hope
Yes,
they have done a good job. Your Gothard road I'll be getting feedback from all of you during your, probably Viva. What is PG rule, I may ask. Okay? Gothard rule also I'm asking the Viva. So it will be good if you can, give a good presentation on this. I won't be
sir.
present because I have an interview right now, 9:30. I'm a little bit 1 minute remaining for the interview. So I will just leave. I won't end this meeting. After you end the meeting, Sanjay, you give me an SMS or a WhatsApp message.
Okay,
I'll
sir.
come back and end the meeting. Okay?
Okay, sure. Okay.
Okay.
Or else we'll all leave, sir. It's okay.
Then, no, it's not okay because the PG rules will be there for your this one.
No, sir.
For
Like
your,
after completing the presentation, we'll all leave. It's okay. Like
yeah. Yeah, you leave and give a message that you are left.
Okay,
I'll
sir.
be in the middle of interview.
Okay, sir.
So after the interview, I'll come back and end the meeting. If I end the meeting, no, it's kind of more secure.
Okay.
Other persons cannot enter. Okay, that's what I've been advised by the ICTS. That's why.
Okay, sir.
It's advising me to end the meeting rather than leave the meeting. So I just now, right now, I'll leave for you. You all can discuss.
Okay, sir. Fine.
After you finish the discussion, you send me an SMS.
Sure, sir.
Whenever I find time, I will come again, log in back and end the meeting.
Okay, sir.
You cannot end the meeting because you don't have the rights.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Bye then, all of you.
Bye, sir.
Bye, sir.
Vignesh, you can start.
Yeah.
Or you guys want break?
What, I will finish it now.
Yeah.
Can you see the PPT?
It's loading. Yes. Yeah, now I can see. Continue.
Okay. So good morning all. I'll be presenting on the Prandtl plot rule. So basically, this is a rule that comes from something called the linearized theory. So just a bit of background about this theory. So we all know the D'Albert's paradox, which we have learnt initially in the circular cylinder case, wherein it states for inviscid incompressible flow, we do not have lift and drag. Now, for an airfoil, also they have applied the same concept. But here in an airfoil, we do know because of its geometry, there is lift produced, but still it says there's no drag produced. Now, the same theory, it is actually extended to subsonic compressible flow as well. Like, for example, initially we took its incompressible flow, but the same principle is extended to compressible flow. So now one might ask how this is actually valid. Now, according to this theory, let's say there's an airfoil. So when it is subjected to uniform flow, that is as far as the okay, I'll tell you. So basically, compressible flow, we know it's starting from 0.3 Mach number. So it goes on. But what this theory says is, as long as the flow remains subsonic, the major cause of drag is actually very less, because when you go to supersonic flows, there is wave drag and all that. So until it reaches the sonic condition, there is a very good approximation, that is, we can still neglect the drag produced. So the next assumption is steady rotational and isentropic flow. Now these assumptions, that is the steady rotational and isentropic, can by theory be extended even to hypersonic flows, because there also we do consider isentropic flow, and when the flow is uniform, we can still maintain an irrotational flow in the theory. Now let's consider an airfoil which is subjected to uniform flow. So this theory assumes small perturbations, that is, the perturbations in the velocities are very small, enough that they can be neglected. And because of these very small perturbations, the angle of attack of the airfoil is also restricted to small angles of attack. Now, this is something which I wanted to say about the linear PDEs. Now, let's say you take and model it as a partial differential equation. If there is a perturbation, it will actually become nonlinear. It's like you have x and you have its the perturbations may add up like x plus 1. So that will actually add up to a nonlinear effect. So those kind of effects are neglected to make it linear. So this is the main crux, that is the compressibility correction. So in the early days of flight research, it was predominantly low speed flight research. So when they eventually started moving on to high speed aerodynamics, they actually had a lot of low speed data which they didn't want to waste. So what they did was, instead of framing a separate theory for high speed flows, they used the same low speed data and theory, and they just introduced a compressibility correction factor when made to the low speed aerodynamics can itself predict the high speed flow and all the aerodynamics associated with it. So basically they introduced the compressibility correction factor, which is beta, and beta is said to be root of 1 minus m square. Now the equation that you see here, 1 minus m square into dou square phi, that equation actually comes from the velocity potential. So I've not given the derivation here, but it actually comes from the energy equation, in which they relate the local flow velocity with the sound velocity and get a term which is the Mach number. And this 1 minus m square, after simplification, they are assuming it as a factor called beta. Now, there are two rules in the Prandtl-Claude rule. So these are the two rules which I have listed. Now, the rule 1 and rule 2 are actually more or less equivalent forms of the same. Now, if you take the second rule, if you take the second rule, what it states is these two rules actually deal with the equivalent compressibility correction. So what I mean by equivalent is, let's take an airfoil, for example, subjected at 5 degree AOA. Now for a given angle of attack, there will be a CL, and if you increase the angle of attack, the CL will also increase. Now if you now this happens when you fix the Mach number. Now let's say you vary the Mach number and then increase the angle of attack. What happens is, we know from flight mechanics and aerodynamics that in order to fly at a low speed Mach number, in order to produce a given value of CL, the same airfoil has to be at a higher angle of attack to produce the same value of CL for a lower Mach number, and for higher Mach numbers, it has to maintain a lower angle of attack. So this concept, what they're saying is, let's say you have 5 degree AOA airfoil. Now if you increase it to 10 degree AOA and at the same time decrease the Mach number, there will be a particular value of angle of attack at which the same CL you got for 5 degree AOA and for the corresponding Mach number, there'll be a same there'll be another value of angle of attack at which there'll be the same CL but for a different Mach number. So same way happens when you increase the Mach number and then decrease the angle of attack. So this way they are relating one value of CL and even CM with the other. So these rules, what they state is basically the second rule, as I said, is the fundamental, and the first rule is a modification. Now the second rule, what it states is, they basically model the coefficient of pressure, and they are finding the same equivalent for different considering different factors like angle of attack and even the shape of the airfoil. Now, as I said, angle of attack I've explained. Now let's take the shape of the airfoil. Basically, they are considering the thickness. Now we know for subsonic airfoils, for supersonic airfoils, the airfoils are generally very thin compared to subsonic. So what they're doing is, they can actually predict the airfoil's geometry by varying the thickness by simply using the correction factor. So you taking all these effects, they are modeling the coefficient of pressure, and with the coefficient of pressure, they eventually arrive at the values of coefficient of lift and moment. So this is the second rule, and the first rule, as I said, for a given coefficient of pressure, the equivalent will be the coefficient of pressure divided by the beta, which is root of 1 minus m square. And with the coefficient of pressure, they have eventually arrived at CL and CM. Now they are not finding CL because, as I said, it starts from the D'Alembert's paradox. So there they do not take drive into account. So according to this theory, you actually directly cannot predict CD because it comes from that theory. And this is the formula for CL and CM, with which you can find the equivalent CL and CM. Now the main problem associated with it is there is a singularity. That is, since it is valid only for a subsonic compressible flow, you cannot extend it to supersonic or even sonic, because if you consider, let's say you put Mach number equal to 1, it goes to 0, which means there is a singularity, it goes to infinite. So what happens is you cannot use this for Mach number 1. So that is gone. So at the same time, from the formula, you can actually use it up to a value that's less than 1. But in reality, you cannot use this beyond the Mach number, say 0.7 or 0.8, because from there the transonic regime starts, and it will introduce a lot of quantities like wave drag, and which will eventually add to non-linearity. So this theory fails from the transonic regime. So theoretically, you cannot use it for Mach 1 according to formula, and in reality, you cannot use it beyond the values that are close to the critical Mach number, which Sir taught yesterday. So that is the main problem. So there are two more theories which are simply improvisations of the same Prandtl-Claude theories. Now there are two theories called the Kármán-Saint rule and the Layton rule, which take into account some effects of nonlinearity. So what happens is, they, for the same, you can actually predict better values of CL and CM and also CP using these two theories. But again, even if you take the Layton rule, you will actually get a singularity. So these theories are essentially only for linear subsonic flow. So only up to subsonic flow, compressible flow, you can use. And to give you a comparison, this is a graph that was taken from a theoretical result in comparison with the experiment. So they have taken a NACA 4412 airfoil and predicted its CL and CM using the basically the pressure coefficient using this formula. So if you see, the Prandtl-Claude is the most basic theory. So Kármán-Saint is an improvement over this, and Layton is a further improvement. So because of this, you can see these graphs for a given Mach number. The Layton theory predicts a better value of CP, and the Prandtl-Claude is the lowest. So the accuracy actually increases, and they have also compared it with the experimental result. So what we have to infer is, these theories, even though Layton theory is a better theory, it is still not worthy enough as the experiment, because if you see the experiment, it only produces minus 0.6, whereas the theory, it goes as low as minus 1.4 or minus 1.5. This is because we only take the linear effects, and the non-linear effects are actually neglected. And also you consider it to be inviscid flow since you take D'Alemot's paradox, but in reality that's not the case. So finally, just a very small problem. So this kind of questions are also asked in GATE, as Sir said yesterday. So they've just asked the CL according to this theory. So all you have to do is, for a given angle of attack, they've given CL. So with which you just substitute in this formula and get CL equal to 1. So one more thing that I wanted to say is, you can generally use even thin airfoil theory to find the CL naught. So using 2 pi alpha if it's asymmetrical airfoil, or if it's a cambered, you have the other term. So you can actually use that. But if they have directly given the CL for the given angle of attack, you need not use that. So what I wanted to say about the angle of attack is, you generally, since it's restricted to small angles of attack, the variation of angle of attack will not give a very large difference in CP. So if you take the example of a transonic or a supersonic case, increasing the angle of attack will produce large difference in CP because of the additional wave drag. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Vignesh. Nice presentation. Can I ask some doubt?
Yeah, okay.
No, you said this thing. So this is valid only for, what, subsonic compressible Mach numbers, right? So from 0.3 to 7, right?
Yeah, somewhere.
You said beyond 0.7 it is not valid.
Yeah.
And
Because from 0.7 or 0.8 it becomes transonic, so you cannot model transonic.
okay. And how does D'Alembert's paradox still remain valid in this case? Explain.
Because even though it's compressible flow, since we are restricting it to a very small angle of attack, the main thing is the at a lower angle of attack, you do not have the pressure drag, so it's only mainly skin friction drag. But for theory, it still assumes inviscid. So from a theoretical perspective only, it's valid, but in reality, it's not 100% valid. So that's why you can see from the experimental results, you get a lower value, I mean a higher value. So
Okay. Okay, thank you, Vignesh. Thank you very much. Others, if you have any doubts. Okay, if there is nothing, then we can wind up actually.